Okay, looks like we're all set up. You start recording. All right, and we're recording. We're live. Got 5 people in here. Should be good to go. Can everybody hear me? If you can hear me, please type something into the live chat or send me a message on Slack. Okay, thank you, Serena. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Again, today's review session is going to be weeks 5 and 6, primarily Bootstrap and jQuery. Thanks. Huh. I just realized something. Anyway, I use Bootstrap 4. Bootstrap 4 is the most recent version of Bootstrap. It's specifically Bootstrap 4 Beta, but a number of the videos in Codify's core curriculum either utilize or show Bootstrap 3. Now, the differences between the two are not huge, so it's not a big deal if you're coming from Bootstrap 3, but I highly recommend all of you get set up with Bootstrap 4. It is better, it's more efficient, it's more current, which is probably its biggest advantage. It's more current, and therefore it is more relevant to learn. So I'm going to quickly run through how to get set up with Bootstrap. This is important. There are multiple ways to get set up with Bootstrap. What I'm going to show you is the easiest and quickest way, and I encourage you all to give it a try. If you run into trouble, for whatever reason, it's because you didn't do exactly what I did. Feel free to reach out to me if you do have problems, and we can try to address them. But please do try to pay close attention for getting set up with Bootstrap 4. All right. So what you want to do is you want to go to Get Bootstrap, all one word, getbootstrap.com, and it should take you to this page. And here I've got my template open on the right. This is probably all you have in your template at this point, unless you're ahead of week 5 in the course. It's okay if you are. I'm operating under the assumption that this is all we have in our template. Maybe you have another link to Font Awesome or something like that. Doesn't matter. Not going to depend on it. So, if this is your template, let me make my text a little bigger. Let me know at any point if you want me to make my code bigger, text bigger, if I'm speaking too softly, anything like that. So this is what our template probably looks like at this point in time. And in order to get started with Bootstrap, once more we go to getbootstrap.com, and we should be in the Bootstrap 4 beta page. And here it says currently version 4.00-beta.2. Okay, I'm going to click on Get Started. And here in this introduction section, there are 2 sections under Quick Start, CSS and JS. And we need both of these things in order to get Bootstrap to work properly. You'll notice under CSS, it's just one long link tag, just like we use to connect our CSS style sheet to our HTML. So I'm going to copy all that. You can actually just click this copy button right here, and it will copy it to your clipboard. And I'm going to make a space above my main.css style sheet on top of it, and I'm going to paste. And there we go. That's using the Bootstrap CDN for Bootstrap 4 Beta to set up Bootstrap and link bootstrap.css to my index.html. It's the exact same thing as our main.css link. It's just much, much longer. Don't let that throw you, though. Okay, so that's part 1. Part 2 is we come to this JS section down here, and there's these 3 script tags. I'll run through what they each are and what they're there for in a second. But for now, let's just copy all of them. I'm going to click this copy to clipboard button again. And now I'm going to go into my code, and at the bottom of my body, right before my body closing tag, let's go ahead and just make a section called scripts, comment it out. So it just acts as a dividing line. And while we're at it, why don't we also do an end scripts comment. So we're going to paste all of those scripts we just copied right in here. Paste. And we've got 1, 2, 3 scripts. Okay? It's 1 script, 2 scripts, 3 scripts. If you haven't actually hit week 6 yet, you probably haven't had to deal with scripts yet. That's okay. All we needed to do was copy these. If you have dealt with scripts, then just to review what these are, this first one is jQuery Slim. jQuery Slim. It's jQuery. It's jQuery. The second one is Popper, popper.js, and the third one is bootstrap.js. So Bootstrap has both a CSS style sheet that we link in our head and a JavaScript sheet which we link with a script tag at the bottom of our body. Okay, and for that Bootstrap JavaScript script sheet to work, we need to include this Popper.js and this jQuery script above Bootstrap. I'm not going to get into it, but the reason why we do that is because this Bootstrap.js requires Popper and jQuery. So we want jQuery and Popper to load before Bootstrap.js. This one depends on these two. So if these do not load first, then the browser is going to try to load this Bootstrap.js. It's not going to have these 2 libraries, which it requires to read this one, and it's going to explode. It's going to go crazy. It's going to throw an error, and your Bootstrap will not function, and nothing will work the way it should. Okay, so those are the 2 steps to getting set up with Bootstrap. As easy as that. You go to getbootstrap.com. Let me just go back, run through this one more time. Getbootstrap.com, click on Get Started, and you copy this link and these scripts. The only thing that might throw you is you need to paste them in the correct place. Okay, you paste the link in your head above your main.css. You paste the scripts at the bottom of your body, right before the closing body tag. Quick note, if you're past week 6, then you already have a custom script tag for your main.js sheet. That will be at the very, very end. You always want to keep that down here, and that's going to look like this. If you don't have this yet, or have no idea what I'm talking about, that is completely fine. Just ignore me for a couple seconds. Okay, if you have a custom script tag, it should be the very last one. You always want your custom script or your custom style sheet to be the last ones to load in their respective sections. That gives them the most priority. It allows them to override things that come before it. It's a good thing to remember. I'm going to get rid of this because right now I don't have a main.js sheet. Not yet. Okay, so we're set up with Bootstrap 4. I'm going to make myself some space. The way Bootstrap works is you come to this getbootstrap.com page, and when you click on the Get Started button, you end up here. Where you are probably going to live is in this documentation section. It's exactly where we are. This is on the side, you'll see this menu. If you do not see this menu, it is simply because your window is too small and the menu has actually collapsed. If that's the case, drag out your window, make it bigger, or you can click on this expandable button right here, and the menu will drop down. I'm going to expand my window so we can get a look at the menu. You're probably going to live in this components section for the most part. All of this is worth reading if you're into Bootstrap, if you're interested in learning how to really take advantage of Bootstrap beyond what I'm going to show you here today. But components is where we're going to spend most of our time. So I'm going to click on the components section, and you'll see here below components we have a lot of different tools or ready-made components that Bootstrap prepares for us. Let's take a look at buttons, for example. I'm going to click on buttons. So here we have a lot of code, each one for a different type of button that uses a different button class or series of classes. They each have this one BTN class. I'll make my font a little bigger. Zoom in. Okay, they each have this BTN class, and they each have a secondary class that's like BTN-primary, button-secondary, button-success, danger, warning, etc. And these are the Bootstrap classes that are pre-built. They exist in that bootstrap.css style sheet, and they provide us with ready-to-use, really useful styles, pre-styled elements essentially. And up here we can see what each of these buttons look like. We've got BTN primary, BTN secondary, success, sorry about that, danger, warning, info, light, dark, link. I didn't even know that was one button, link. That seems pointless, but the rest of them are pretty cool. It's really useful to use. Now, the reason there are two classes here is because BTN does its own thing, and BTN primary or BTN secondary does its own thing. As a quick demonstration of what I mean, I'm going to create a button. Type equals button, and I'm just going to I'm going to give it no class to start. We can see what it looks like by default with no Bootstrap style. Let's open this in browser. And there's our button. Looks like a regular Windows 95 click me button. Not particularly attractive, not flat, not well designed, but it does what it needs to do. And then normally we would jump into our CSS from here and start styling it. But if I give this button a class of BTN, okay, just the Bootstrap class of button, and save, reload, zoom in, this is our button now. It's flat. It has a slight border radius. If you can see, the corners are touch rounded. It doesn't have that weird background gradient from the 90s, and it doesn't have a bit of an awkward borderline to it. Okay, so that's what the class of BTN does. If I just give it the class of BTN primary without the class of BTN, it still looks like an old-fashioned button, but it has much nicer color scheme about it. So that's why whenever you use a Bootstrap button, you'll often see these two classes combined. And you can take advantage of one or the other, or both, depending on your preference. With both of them, this looks like a true Bootstrap button. And look, it even has a pre-coded hover effect on it. I don't know if you can tell from the screen, but it gets slightly darker when I hover over it. So that's a very, very fundamental, very simple example of Bootstrap classes and how great they are. Sorry. Because I was able to do that without a single line of CSS. So let's take a look at what else we have down here. Let's get out of buttons and look at navbar. Navbar. So here in the navbar section, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. There's a lot of examples of Bootstrap ready navbars. This one is actually pretty complicated. It's got this big navbar logo here, a couple links, it's got a built-in drop-down menu, a search bar, and a search bar button. And all of these are different navbars. I think some of them are actually collapsed. Oh no, these are just the really simple, showing you how to deal with an image in the corner of your navbar like this. Okay, and you can always just copy this code and use it, but let's look at, here's one that's more comprehensive but simpler. It's just the navbar, our logo, and then these 4 links up here. Well, all we need to do is copy this code and paste it right into our document as is, and when I reload my page, we've got a navbar ready to go. It's collapsed right now because I'm super zoomed in, but that's actually a cool feature. It automatically collapses, and if I click on this button, it'll expand just like a mobile menu. I'm going to zoom out so it's not collapsed. See, we have a nav bar up top. Alright, so that's the introduction to Bootstrap. That's getting us set up. That's using the components page. That's really just the tip of the iceberg, I'm telling you. Bootstrap offers so much amazing functionality that you can take advantage of, and I encourage you guys to explore further, but I will do my best to show you the best of what Bootstrap has to offer. So without further ado, let's jump into the exercises for week 5. Okay, how do you add Bootstrap to your code? We already addressed that. Remember, there's one link tag in the head and 3 script tags at the bottom of the body. How many total columns can exist in a single Bootstrap row? The answer to that is 12, but I need you to understand Bootstrap columns and rows are the single most valuable feature of Bootstrap that we will take advantage of, and I will go into great detail explaining how those work in just a little bit. Do you need both jQuery and Bootstrap's JavaScript to use Bootstrap's JavaScript features? Bootstrap's JavaScript is that bootstrap.js file that we added in a script tag, and jQuery is that very first script tag in our scripts section at the bottom of our body. You do need both of them to use Bootstrap's JavaScript features. And an example of a Bootstrap JavaScript feature is that collapsible navbar. This navbar would not work without Bootstrap's JavaScript. It would be styled the way we need it to be, but it wouldn't properly function as a collapsible menu with a button like this without Bootstrap's JavaScript. Where do you write the code to link both of those JavaScript files to your HTML? Once again, we write them at the bottom of our body in our index.html. Name 3 things that Bootstrap's JavaScript lets you do easily. Well, it allows you to create a collapsible navbar, just like we discussed. It also allows you to take advantage of sliding image carousels. Let's find one with controls here. Sliding image carousels. It allows you to create drop downs, collapsible sections, modal pop-ups. Let's look at an example of that real fast. So if I click this button, modal pop-up, Bootstrap, and all the code for that is right down here, ready to use, ready to customize however you need to. Take advantage of this pre-built functionality. Discussion questions. How do you connect pages on a multi-page website? Well, this is not actually a Bootstrap related question, but let's say, for example, in addition to my index.html, I had another page on my website that was an about page. Okay, and I would write the code for that in, say, about.html. Well, if I wanted to link that to my index.html, my home page, and let's say I had an LI, and inside of that LI I had an anchor with the text or label about, and inside my anchor tag it would have an href equal to about.html. Just like that. So now when I click on about, it should load the about.html page, assuming that this about.html file is in our root project folder right next to index.html. If it's located anywhere else, then that's when you need to include the entire file path. Like maybe you have an interior pages folder and it's located in there. You need to know how to independently write that file path. But this is how you link another HTML page to your home page, by simply inserting it into an href of an anchor tag. Okay, what is Bootstrap? Bootstrap is a a library or a framework that it kind of straddles the line between library and framework, but Bootstrap is an external style sheet, an external JavaScript sheet that allows us to make use of a lot of pre-built, pre-styled elements and functionality. It primarily streamlines writing of CSS. You can style your page almost completely, if not completely, without writing a single line of CSS. That is the beauty of Bootstrap. And while that has appeal for a lot of students, because a lot of students hate CSS or just don't feel terribly confident using it, I don't want you to use Bootstrap as a crutch. You still need to know how to write efficient and clean CSS. That is still critically important for job hunting, but Bootstrap does make your life a lot easier. Additionally, it's unlikely that you'll ever be working on a project where Bootstrap is truly the only thing that you will use and you won't have any CSS at all. That is unlikely. More importantly, you will often have to solve problems related to Bootstrap in terms of CSS priority or precedence and specificity, and you will need to know how to manipulate CSS in order to get around those kinds of problems. So you can't learn Bootstrap and then just write off CSS, but Bootstrap does make CSS a lot easier, and it allows you to focus on really the more important style problems or considerations rather than making sure all of your buttons look flat. Okay? What is a CDN and why would you use it? CDN stands for Content Delivery Network, and what it essentially is it allows us to incorporate an external style sheet, just like this, or an external JS sheet using a URL. And the reason why we would use it is because it's super efficient. We don't need to then download Bootstrap, create a Bootstrap folder in our project folder, and write this as a relative file path. This just lets us drop it in our HTML and get going, and that's great. It's super efficient that way, and it's very effective for development. Why you would not use it is, say you wanted to code on a long airplane ride. Well, obviously this is not going to help you. You're not going to be able to use Bootstrap without an internet connection. So frankly, a lot of websites will use CDNs during development, but when they're ready for live deployment, that's when developers will actually download the file, keep it in their project folder, and change all of these hrefs and all of these sources to relative file paths. Another thing to bear in mind is using CDNs will make sure that these are always current. So if Bootstrap updates something, I'll automatically and immediately have access to that update, which can be good or bad, depending on what was updated and how sensitive your site is to that. I use CDNs all the time, especially when building a project, but I do think it is generally advisable to download the final files in minified format, and incorporate those into your project folders when you're ready to deploy. Okay. What's the difference between Bootstrap's container and container fluid? Let's take a look. I'm going to create a div with a class of container. And I'm going to create a div with a class of container fluid. I'm not going to put any content in these divs yet, but for the sake of the demo, I'm going to give all of my divs a height of, let's say, 250 pixels and a background color. And to make sure they separate so we can see them clearly, okay, now let's load our page. That's not right. It's not our web page at all. Here we go. All right, so up at the top we have our div with the class of container, and at the bottom we have our div with the class of container fluid. As you can see, the container, it does not stretch all the way to the sides of the page. This container fluid does. If you open your inspector and take a closer look at what's actually happening here, let's hover over the element. The container has margin to the left and right. Let me turn off that margin bottom so it's not confusing. The container has margin to the left and right. That's how that works. And no matter how small or how wide the screen is, it's always, actually it's not going to have that margin at a very small screen, but until you get to a very small screen, it is going to maintain that margin. Whereas a container fluid will stretch all the way to the sides of the screen, to the sides of the element which contains it. Okay, so that's the fundamental difference between a container and container fluid. How many columns are in each row of Bootstrap's grid system? Once again, there are 12. There are 12 columns in each row of Bootstrap's grid system. What does the MD in call MD6 mean, and what does it do? All right, so here's where I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about Bootstrap's grid system. I'm going to leave the container fluid, and inside of this container fluid, I'm going to create another div with a class of row. In order to take advantage of Bootstrap's grid system, you need to have your columns inside of a row, and your row needs to be inside of either a container or container fluid. So this kind of setup should get very, very familiar to you as you use Bootstrap. Okay, so we've got my container fluid and we've got my row, and inside of my row I'm going to create yet another div. I'm going to give this one an ID of tomato so we can make sure it has some color and we can clearly see what's going on. Okay. So it has an ID of tomato, and all that ID is doing is giving it a height and a background color. It is not determining the width or anything else of this div. I'm also going to give this div a class of column 6, call 6. And I'm going to close it. So let's see what that looks like. There. Now we have a column which takes up exactly 50% of our row, which takes up 100% of the container fluid. The container fluid stretches all the way across the screen. We've got a row inside the container fluid, and rows will always take up all of the width of whatever they're inside of. And inside of the row, we have a 6-column div. 6-column div. That's what that call-6 means. And remember, there are a maximum of 12 columns in a row. 12 columns in any row. So if our div is occupying 6 of those columns, it is going to automatically occupy 50% of the row. And this will apply at any screen size. It is automatically responsive. And that is one of the beauties of Bootstrap. Okay, so that's a 6-column div. If I change this to 2 columns, we should get a very, very narrow column. There we go. That's 1/6 of the entire row. And once again, it stays responsive no matter how big or how small our screen gets. Okay, now the question asked what this MD in call MD6 means. What Bootstrap classes allow us to do is account for how we want these divs to appear at different screen sizes. And the different screen sizes on offer for Bootstrap classes are extra small, small, medium, large, and extra large, just like that. When I write column-2 like this, it implies extra small. This column is now going to be 2 columns at every screen size, from extra small all the way up. Okay, if I write, let me change this first to 12. So at 12 columns, it should occupy how much of the row? The entire thing. Okay, it occupies 100% of the width of the row, 12 columns out of 12. But what I can add to this is something like call small 8. I don't know why there's all that space there. And what this means is the column is gonna occupy 12 columns of the row at an extra small screen size, and then at a small screen size, it's only gonna occupy 8. So what that means is if we start this at an extra small screen size, it's gonna occupy 12 columns until I start to stretch it out. You get to a small screen. Oh, I'm super zoomed in. Hold on. There we go. So we've got extra small, extra small, extra small, small. When we hit a small screen size, it jumps to 8 columns out of 12, or 2/3 of the width of the row. Okay, let me change this to medium, and we can see the difference a little more. Okay, so it stays at 12 for an extra small screen size and a small screen size, and then once I get to a medium screen size, that's when it jumps to taking up 2/3 of the row, 8 columns, and it does that all the way up to large or extra large. Okay, so you can get as precise as you want with these differences. I mean, I can have, let's do column small 10, column medium 8, column large 6, and column extra large 4. So now it's going to start at 12 columns. When I hit a small screen, it's going to occupy 10. A medium screen, it's going to occupy 8. A large screen, it's going to occupy 6. And an extra large screen, it's going to occupy 4. And let's go ahead and test what that looks like real fast. Reload my page. We've got extra small, extra small. Then we've got small. See this? Oh no, just hasn't loaded yet. Get to 100%. Oh, I didn't save either. Sorry, folks. Reload. Alright, so at a small screen size, we're at 10 columns. If I keep on dragging, let's check medium screen size, we've hit 8 columns, 8 of 12. Large screen size, we're at 6 of 12, exactly 50% of the width. And let's see if we can hit extra large on my laptop. I don't think we actually can. Let me zoom out then. Yeah, that's not helping. Okay, I can't actually hit extra large screen size on my laptop, but hopefully you get the idea. If I were able to reach extra large screen size, this column would take up, this div would only take up 4 columns. So 1/3 of the entire width of the row. Alright, so that's an overview of the grid system. I will get more into it as we work on today's exercises, but what's important to keep in mind is this really can get pretty sophisticated as you are dealing with multiple divs. So let me go ahead and create an exact copy of tomato, and I'm going to rename it to lime. And in main.css, I'm going to style lime pretty much in the same way, but with a different color. Okay. I reload my page. Now we've got 2 divs right on top of each other. In fact, let me make these shorter so we can see them a little clearer. Okay, we've got a tomato div and a lime div. 12 columns on an extra small screen. And we've got, let me see, 10 columns on a small screen. 8 columns on a medium screen, and watch what happens when we jump to large. They jump side by side. Can you think about why they do that? Each div at this point in time at a large screen size is taking up 6 columns. Well, how many maximum columns can sit in a row in one line? 12, remember? So now we have 2 divs that are 6 columns wide, which means they're able to fit on the same row next to each other. And as we get to, can't get to extra large, right? So there's 6 columns that allows them to sit on the same line. I can change, let me change all of these to column 4. So they're always going to be 4 columns. And let's make a third div called teal. Reload, and there we go. You got 4 columns, 4 columns, and 4 columns, which means they're all going to be divided equally, taking up 1/3 of the row that contains them. And this is a really common way of displaying information. Just to review, let me change container fluid to container, and let's see how it changes the presentation here. Just gives them a little margin on both sides like that. Okay, but they're still taking up 1/3 of the row inside that container. Okay, container, row. 4 columns out of 12. And something that you'll see pretty commonly is you'll see information displayed in a row of 3 like this, but then as you get to a mobile-sized screen, normally they start to stack vertically. A quick example of this would be the Microsoft page, I believe. Okay, this will probably all work. Look at this for work section. We've got 4 columns essentially of information presented here, but as I bring my screen in very small, now they all stack vertically. Here's the for work section: Microsoft 365, Windows 10 Enterprise, Microsoft Education, Azure. They have stacked vertically at an extra small screen. And then at a small screen, they stack 2 on 2, 2 on top of another 2. And as you get larger, that's when they rearrange themselves horizontally. This is critical for responsive website design. All of responsive web design is about reorganizing the information on your page to be the most effective on a given screen size or on a given device. You want mobile users to be able to access all of your information in an effective way, a way that is appropriate for a mobile device. If all of these columns stayed in a horizontal row like this on a screen that was this wide, it would be very, very difficult to tell what is going on. So this kind of responsive design is critical. And Bootstrap is a very, very easy way to design your site in a responsive manner to account for mobile users, tablet users, and desktop users all at the same time. So as a quick example, we've got 4 columns side by side like this. Let's say we only want them to be 4 columns at a large screen size. So let's go ahead and change all of these to column large 4. And before this, I'm going to write column 12. This is going to ensure that by default, these divs take up 100% of the width of the row, which means they're going to stack vertically. But when I get to a large enough screen size, they're going to jump to 4. And let's even do a middle ground in here. Let's do medium size 6. So what do you expect to see at a medium screen size? We should see 2 on top, 1 on bottom, right? 6, 6, and 6 below. So let's bring this down to extra small, reload. We've got 3 vertically stacked divs. As I bring my window up to a medium screen size, Here we go, we get 6, 6, and 6. Okay, so 12 here, 6 here, 6, 6, 6. And as we bring it to a large screen size, then we revert back to the nice horizontal thirds that we had before. All right, Bootstrap grid system and how it is useful. Column offset does exist now. They reincorporated it back into Bootstrap 4. So if you were in my class and I told you that column offset no longer exists, they reintroduced it into Bootstrap 4. I still recommend not using it. I don't personally think it has a use. If you'd like to look into it, feel free. But I'm going to go ahead and get rid of 2 of these divs and show you a much more useful alternative, in my opinion. I'm going to make this div a hard 4 columns. So it's only going to be 4 columns wide no matter what. I'm going to add an additional class here called mx-auto. And let's change this container back to a container fluid while we're at it. What mx-auto is going to do is it's going to perfectly center that div. mx-auto is the equivalent of applying margin 0 auto to this div. So it centers it perfectly, which is great. And if I wanted to, I can do ml auto, which applies an automatic margin to the left, or in other words, it pushes the div all the way to the right. Okay? And obviously there's also mr auto for pushing all the way to the left. Now think about how you can use these in conjunction with other divs. Let's add back in our lime and teal divs, and let's make them all 2 columns. So there's still going to be empty space. They're only taking up 6 of 12 total columns. And let's give them all a class of mx-auto. Reload. And now they're all perfectly centered between each other. Okay. What if I wanted them all centered and all the white space equally divided on either side? Well, then I would take that first tomato div and give it a class of ml auto, so it's pushing as hard as it can to the left. I would take out the mx auto on the middle div, and I would add an mr auto to the div all the way on the right. So there, they're all centered smack dab in the middle. Got ml auto coming from this tomato, mr auto coming from this teal. And just so you know, I'm not going to give you any more examples of this because I'd like to keep moving, but you can also use these media breakpoints on mx, mr, and ml auto. So if I only wanted it to have mr auto at a medium screen size, I can do that. You can get as precise as you want with how you organize the layout of your information on your page using Bootstrap classes. And once more, with the exception of giving each of these divs a color and a default height, I've written no extra CSS to do this. All right, let's dive into the exercises for Bootstrap, because this will give us an opportunity to take a look at a lot more features. In HTML, using Bootstrap, add a navigation bar, update each href attribute. Add a navigation bar. So I'm going to go to getbootstrap.com. Let me start from the beginning. Getbootstrap.com. I click on Documentation up at the top. Click on Components on the left. And I look for navbar. Now that I've found in the navbar section, I'm going to go down to a fairly simple, not complicated navbar, and I'm going to copy the code for it. Let's see. Here we go. I like this one. This is usually my go-to. It's pretty simple and straightforward. I'm just going to copy all that code. I'm going to get rid of our colored divs here, and I'm just going to paste it. And I'm going to make sure all my indentation is nice and clean Everything looks good. Save. Let's delete this extra CSS I'm not using now and reload my page. There we go. I've got my nav bar up the top. Now I can go in here and change this. Let's change nav bar to week 5. Okay, and here this home anchor, it's got a lot of extra stuff going on. I'm going to get rid of the span. I don't need it. We've got home, features, pricing. I'm going to get rid of this disabled class because I don't want a disabled anchor. Let's change this to, I don't know, contact. And there we go. Now our nav bar has week 5 in that brand section, and my anchors have their text has been adjusted. Now watch what happens as I bring my window in. The nav bar is going to collapse into this usable button. Let's say I feel like this collapses too soon. I think we still have plenty of room for all those links up top. I don't want it to collapse yet. Well, if I look at my nav, the parent element, here we have this navbar expand-lg class. Well, I know from experience that this is what I can edit in order to change when my navbar collapses. I'm going to change that large to small. And now our navbar should stay expanded and clear until we hit a small screen size, which I think is much more appropriate. But that's just me. Maybe you want something different. Maybe you want it to always be collapsed. That's something that you can do. But you want to get into the habit of exploring some of these pre-built classes and seeing how you can edit them to your preference. Something else I want to do. Let's move all these links over to the right while keeping our week 5 brand logo thing here on the left. A way you might think of doing that based on the earlier weeks is something like float, which once again I'll remind you all, never use if you can help it. Never use float. I hate float. Avoid float. Don't use it. But what about that margin auto class that we just introduced? Do you think we could use that anywhere? I'm going to open up my inspector. Click on this little button to highlight elements. And let's see how all this is arranged. Look at that. We've got this anchor, the class of navbar brand right here. And containing all of the other anchors and LIs, we've got this div. This div, which occupies its own space, where it occupies all the space that our navbar brand does not. And inside that div, we've got our UL. A UL which is pretty contained. Look, that's the only space the UL takes up. So I'm going to double click on the class here in my Elements tab. And next to navbar nav, I'm going to type ML auto and hit enter and see if this works. And it does. Look at that. It has moved our UL and all of its LIs all the way to the right side of the navbar. So I'm going to add that to my code because I like that. Save, reload, and it looks good. Okay. Something else you're going to want to notice, our navbar has this class, BG Light. Well, that is an automatic Bootstrap class that automatically gives it this light background. But I'm going to change this to BG Dark. Now our navbar has this automatic dark background. And I'm also going to change this navbar light to navbar dark. See how that affects it. Well, now all of our text is on the lighter side. Let's try BG Danger, just for fun. And we've got a red navbar. How about BG Info? There you go. If these info danger, we could do, I think warning is one. Yeah, if these keywords sound familiar to you, it's because they match those button classes that we were investigating at the beginning. Info, warning, danger, success, those are usable color classes that you can apply to virtually anything in Bootstrap. You can set your background easily to those colors. You can set your text easily to those colors using those keywords. Let's go back to warning. just because it's the closest to tomato. Oh, no, not warning, I'm sorry, danger. Because it's as close as we get to tomato. Although, again, if I wanted to, I could now come in here and let's do BG tomato. Background color, tomato. I've made a custom class, which I can now use and apply to anything, and it should give me a tomato background. Perfect. My favorite color. Okay, so we have our nav bar. What's next? Add a Jumbotron below your navigation bar and update the content to explain why you like Bootstrap. A Jumbotron is another Bootstrap component. So I'm going to go back into Bootstrap, back into the components section, and look for Jumbotron. Does anybody have any questions so far? Feel free to drop them in the live chat window or send me a direct message on Slack. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions or if there's something you'd like me to go over, something that you felt I was too fast on, anything like that. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. So here we're in the Jumbotron section, and I'm just going to grab this first one. It's nice and simple. This is the code for the Jumbotron, a div with a class of Jumbotron. Let me say right here, don't ever try to memorize all this code for this particular Jumbotron. You don't need that. That's the benefit of Bootstrap. You can always come to this component section and look for what you need. Now, by virtue of experience, I know a lot of exactly what these classes are doing, and therefore I think I could confidently recreate this without the code. But that comes with time. Right now, you don't ever need to memorize all this. You can always come here and just copy the code. So I'm going to go underneath our nav bar, and I'm just going to paste a Jumbotron. Make sure my indenting is nice and clean. Don't forget, always make sure your indenting is nice and clean. It's the easiest way to screw yourself up by not cleaning up your indents. Alright, looks alright. I don't actually like that it's flush against the sides that way. One of the reasons is because you'll notice about a Jumbotron is that they do have a slight border radius. So Jumbotrons, I find them more appropriate as like self-contained boxes or calls to action, rather than as some big hero image section in your intro or anything like that. So in order to address that, I'm actually going to wrap this whole Jumbotron inside a container and take advantage of some of that automatic margin that container gives us. Okay, not bad. Let's say I want to get some space between the top of the Jumbotron and the bottom of my nav bar. A couple ways I could do that, but an easy way is, let's take this, let's do the container, and I'm going to do padding P-5. Let's see what that does. Look at that. It applies pretty even, decently wide padding all around the inside of that container. P-5. That's a new class in Bootstrap 4 that's excellent to take advantage of. The number, it goes from a scale of 0 to 5. And once again, this is also something for which you can use those media breakpoints and get really, really precise with when you want your padding or margin to take effect. So margin is another one. I could do M-5. Or I could get even more precise and do something like padding top. Padding top-5. Or padding bottom. Padding left. Padding right. In addition, I could do padding Y. What padding Y-5 is going to do is apply a thick padding up to the top and the bottom of this container, but not to the left and right. And that's in contrast with padding X. That applies a thick padding to the left and right of the container, but not to the top and bottom. And once again, padding -5, just P-5, will apply that padding all around it. So I'm going to go with padding Y-5 for now. Okay, I'm okay with that. please try to extrapolate some of the stuff that I tell you. Try and see the patterns that I'm giving you. So if you can do py and px-5, it should stand to reason to you that you can also do my or mx-5. Okay, try and see the patterns that I'm giving you and try to independently apply them elsewhere. I don't want to give you all of the tools. Some of them you do need to figure out on your own, but I'm going to try to give you all the breadcrumbs that you need to really take maximum advantage of Bootstrap. And again, this video is being recorded, so you can always come back and review it again. There is literally no excuse from this point on, not knowing that you can add padding to the top and bottom of a div or any element with this type of class using Bootstrap 4. Okay? So that's our Jumbotron. I'm not going to update the text. I don't think you guys need help with that. Although just for fun, let's change this button primary to button warning. And button, I'll leave it as button large. Reload. That does not look good. But, okay, I've changed it to button warning. How about we do this? In addition to all of these button classes, I'm going to give it a class of text-white. Text-white. That actually looks better. I like that more. Now the text inside the button has turned white. That's another great Bootstrap class I recommend taking advantage of. So once more, we've done all of this formatting, all of this layout, all of these colors, all of these different text styles without writing any CSS, with the exception of this one custom background color, because I have a weird obsession with tomato. Okay. And we even have these hover effects working for us with no effort. Next step. Below the Jumbotron, add a Bootstrap container, a row inside the container, and 3 grid columns adding up to 12 inside the row. So I'm going to come below my container, and I'm going to create a brand new container. Div class equals container. And inside of this container, I'm going to create a div with a class of row, because any Bootstrap column needs to be inside of a row, which needs to be inside of a container or container fluid. Think of containers or container fluids as the base building block for any Bootstrap project. I mean, if you want, you can even just give your body a class of container fluid, just to make sure any Bootstrap, any row, any column you put inside here will at least marginally be playing by the rules. And if you do this, it will not actually change the way your body looks. Okay, so bear that in mind. However, it is more effective to really just separate sections of your site into their own given container or container fluids. Containers fluid. Container fluid, containers fluid, whatever. You get the idea. Created a container, created a row, and inside of this row, I'm going to create 3 grid columns adding up to 12. So that means I'm going to create one div. Let's give it a class of column 4. And let's just copy that twice more. 4 columns. And let's go ahead and take advantage of those background color classes. Let's go background primary. And then let's do background tomato. And then let's do background success. Okay, now these divs have no content, so we're probably not going to see anything yet. So let's move to the next step. Add an H2 image, P, and button element inside each column div. H2, image, P, and button. Let's open one of these up. Add an H2. Add a P. Before the P, add an image. a button. Let's give these buttons a class of BTN and BTN danger. It's gonna look so bad. So many colors. As a general rule of thumb, guys, don't use as many colors. This is strictly for demonstration purposes. Okay. Now update each element so it references one thing you learned about Bootstrap. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to find pictures of beagles. Because I'm a teacher and I can. Okay, that one's a given. There's one. Oh my god, two. And okay, three. All right, so I'm going to take these URLs and I'm just going to plug them into the sources of my image elements. Now, obviously, if you wanted to download them, you'd right-click, save image as, and you'd save it into your image folder, in your project folder. But for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to paste in the URLs for now. Guess what my favorite breed of dog is? Actually, it's tied between beagles and greyhounds. Okay, Beagle 1, Beagle 2, Beagle 3. And against all odds, somehow I have a Maltese. I'm going to update the H2s to say pretty much the same thing. Beagle 1, Beagle 2, Beagle 3. But I'm not bitter about it at all. He's just got a terrible personality. Beagles are awesome. Let's plug in some dummy text into those P elements. And we're good to go. Now, something about this is going to look very off, and that's going to be our images, but we'll see soon enough. Okay, now I scroll down, and there we go. We've got, oh, I have no text in my buttons. Where did I close them? Good Lord. Don't do that. Okay, always close your buttons, and always put some text inside them. There we go. We've got 3 different divs with 3 different background colors and 3 different red buttons. And that color is coming from that BTN-danger class, remember? Now, our images are obviously overflowing because they're way too big. Bootstrap offers a very easy way to fix that. I can select my image, and there are 2 options here. I'm going to go class equals. I can do W-100, which will ensure that the image is always 100% of the width of its container. So it's always going to be 100% of the width of that 4-column div. The alternative is image fluid. The class of image fluid will make sure that the image scales properly with its container, no matter what screen size you're at. So they both do the same thing in the case of images, but for other elements, W100 is actually equally as effective, whereas image fluid will only work on images. I didn't save. There we go. 3 images that fit nicely into their divs, and they should scale properly as I change my screen size. They do. They even get super teeny. Look at that. And that is something that we'll address now, actually. We've got our 3 divs. I don't like how they're butting flush up against the bottom of the page, so let's grab that container. I'm going to give it padding bottom 5. There we go. Now we got some space down there. I also don't like how this button is flush against the bottom. So let's give all of these columns padding Y of also 5. Okay, there we go. Now we've got some nice padding on the top and bottom of each of these columns. We've got some padding at the bottom of this container to make sure that these divs are not flush up against the bottom. To show where this container is, let's give it a dark background. Ooh, that's weird. That's weird, but it does show us what space the container is actually taking up. Let's change it to container fluid, just for a quick look. Okay, something like that. I'm going to leave it at a container fluid, and I'm going to give it padding X of also 5. So it's kind of like between a container fluid and a container. It's got a little margin on either side, not a little padding on either side, but not a huge chunk of margin. And now I'm going to get rid of that background dark. And we're right where we were. Next step that I would like to solve here is, well, let's start by getting all of these images the same exact size, because they're all different sizes and it's looking a little weird. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I would like them all to be equally sized. So this is going to require, should I do this with Bootstrap or not? Let's start with just vanilla CSS. I'm going to select all my images, and I'm going to give them a defined height of 250 pixels. Okay, all my images now will automatically be 250 pixels. Except with that image fluid class on. Okay, let's change all these image fluids to width 100. There we go. Okay, so now they're all still going to scale with our container. They're 100% of the width of their container, but then they're now all going to stay at, what is that, 250 pixels wide. Okay, what you'll notice is this obviously causes the images to distort horribly. This is something a lot of students struggle with at the beginning, but a way to overcome this is with the very simple object fit property. So inside my image selector in CSS, I'm going to write object fit, and I'm just going to write cover. This is going to ensure that the image is not going to change its aspect ratio, it's not going to distort, and it's always going to be at least as big as is necessary for it to cover the space of the content of its element. Let's reload, and there we go. The images stay at their right aspect ratio, they don't distort. Now obviously as you get smaller, they're going to cut off a little bit, or as you get bigger, they're going to expand, but they no longer stretch, they no longer squish, they stay looking like normally sized beagles. So all is well in the world. That's one. Let's leave it at that. There is a way to do this, to do most of this using Bootstrap. You still need to add this object fit cover property on your own in CSS, but some of this can be done with Bootstrap. I am not going to show you. The next step that we want to do here is we want to make this a little more responsive. So it's nice that it scales up and down with us, but eventually it gets absurdly small or absurdly thin, and we don't want that. So how can we do that? Let's deal with the grid system here. Right now all of our columns, or all of our divs are occupying 4 columns no matter what. Let's change this to 12. So they're going to start by occupying 12, and then at a medium screen size it's going to jump to 4. Okay, I'm going to copy that and just paste for the other 2. So it's going to be 12 columns at an extra small screen size, 12 columns at a small screen size, and then 4 columns at a medium screen size all the way up. So bring this in, reload, there we go. They stack vertically, nice and clean. And as I make my screen larger, they jump to a horizontal arrangement like that. Okay. Now maybe like here at a small screen, I think they're too big. They still can't sit next to each other, but I don't think they should be this big. Well, what I can do is in between column 12 and column medium 4. Let's do column small 8. Okay, and let's copy that for the others. Now when I reload, there we go. They're a nicer size. They're still stacked vertically, but they're only 8 columns wide, so they're not quite so huge. I think this is a good size at this screen size, but problem now is they're not centered. They're pulling to the left. I don't like that. So here's where we would need to get pretty specific with our margin classes. I'm going to just line break here so we can see exactly what we're dealing with. We've got our column classes up here, and then we're going to do something like MX Auto. Remember, that will center any div or any column div. MX Auto, but we only want this to apply at a small screen size, right? To be honest, if we left it on, you would be completely fine, because it's not going to affect a 12 column div, and it's not going to affect 3-4 column divs. They're going to take up all the empty space. But for argument's sake, let's say that we only want this to apply at a small screen size. Well, we could do MX0, MX small auto, MX medium 0. So at an extra small screen size, there's no margin to the left and right. At a small screen size, there's an automatic margin to the left and right, which will center it. And once we hit a medium screen size, it switches back to 0. So let's go ahead and copy this for the other two. Save, reload, and there we go. Nice centered, vertical, not too big div columns. And in an extra small, they're still 12 columns wide. It's a container with padding, so that's why you see the space on the side. But while we're here, let's get rid of that space on the side on an extra small screen. Let's just change this px-5 inside the container fluid classes to px small 5. Reload, and there we go. Now we're only going to have that padding when we hit a small screen size. Okay, so if you notice that this is actually a superfluous class, you are correct. But it never hurts to write too many classes like this to account for every different screen size. It will protect you, it's good practice, and it just makes sure that you're getting the layout and styling that you want. Okay, so that's the power of Bootstrap grid system. And again, we have written almost no CSS. This doesn't count, and this could be done with Bootstrap. All right, next exercise. Remove the margin from the navigation. No. Update the background color of the navigation bar using code in your main.css file. Well, I already did that, but for the sake of the demonstration, let's turn this off, and let's bring that original background light color in. Okay, so this is how we started, remember? And it was also navbar light. Let's just bring it back to basic. Just like this. So if I wanted to change the background of this, remember the exercise says do it in your CSS. If I wanted to change the background color of this nav bar, let's select my nav and give it a background color of tomato. Reload, and nothing happens. This will probably happen a lot as you're using Bootstrap. The reason is you need to be aware of both the specificity of the selector that you're using and the Bootstrap classes that element already has applied, and you need to be familiar with the process for overriding Bootstrap styles. So if I did this and I saw that my color was not applying, I wanted to figure out what's going on, I'd open my inspector, click this button, highlight my nav bar, and take a look in the Styles tab. And honestly, the first thing I see is actually a background color applied by a BG-light class. So that actually tells me exactly what the problem is. But let's scroll down a little bit till we find this background color tomato, and if you can see, it's crossed out. That means it is being overridden. The reason it's being overridden in this case is because of this BG-light class, which, if you'll recall, came with the code that I copied. So now I know to come here and delete this class name. And if I reload, we have a tomato background. Okay. Another thing you might run into is maybe you want some of the features of some of these Bootstrap classes, but I want to override, say, the position of the nav bar. Let's say I want to make it position fixed. Okay, so let's go into my nav and let's do position fixed. Reload. Did it change? No. When I scroll down, my nav bar does not scroll with me. So let's select it and see what's going on. Let's scroll down. And look at that. Position fixed is crossed out. Sorry, just a second, guys. Thank you, Matt. Position fixed is crossed out. The reason is because it is being overridden by something. So now it's your job to dig around in the Styles tab and figure out what's doing it. Well, here under .navbar, we've got this position relative. Now that's not crossed out, which tells me that that is a feature of a, there you go, now it's fixed. If I turn it off, it's fixed. Which confirms that this is what's overriding my code. And this is a style that comes from this .navbar bootstrap class. The reason why this is overriding is not because, like, I can't come here and get rid of the navbar class. I want it because this is a navbar. I just want to change this one style. So what I have to do is be at least as specific in my selector as this. Because remember, specificity in CSS is king. I'm selecting my nav with the nav element or type selector, whereas this class is applying position relative with a .navbar class selector. So let's go and change this to .navbar. Make sure it's at least as specific. Save, and now if I reload, it's fixed. It's doing what I want it to do. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that you might run into in using Bootstrap. You'll want to cherry pick some of the styles that you take from each of these core classes, like navbar. And you need to know how to override them, or how to be as specific as you need to be. Or you need to know, and more importantly, how to figure out what is being overridden. It's very, very important that you understand how to troubleshoot your styling when it's not working the way you want it to. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've gone ahead and gotten rid of that position fixed issue because I don't want them to be position fixed, and we have one more exercise to go through, and I'm not going to do any of that. So that's pretty much Bootstrap in a nutshell. What I will do, I'm going to run to the restroom real fast, but when I come back, I'm going to quickly reconstruct Orange Juice using pure Bootstrap, and depending on how long that takes, I'm not going to do Colorful Flat, but I might do Liquid Gem using Bootstrap. So give me 1 minute. If anyone needs to run to the restroom, do it. If you have questions to ask me, go ahead and pump them into the live chat or message me on Slack, and I'll be right back. No questions. So I'm guessing you're all just really getting Bootstrap. All right, well, that's good. If there is anything you want me to go over more closely, anything you want more detail on, once again, just let me know. Actually, let me double check and make sure there aren't actually any questions. Yeah, there are none. You people suck. Okay. Moving on then. Jumping straight into orange juice. I'm glad everybody is actually getting this. I hope that is the case. I hope this is useful for those of you who will be watching it in the future. Alright, I'm going to delete all of my code and get ready for building orange juice using Bootstrap. Alright, make sure. Blank page, good to go. Alright, we have a nav bar, we have a footer, we have a main section, search bar. That main section is split into two. Let's try and set up. Just create a nav. Just kind of mark my code. Let's do div. I'll give my divs IDs, although I'm probably not going to use them. Class equals. And then we have a footer. Okay. So once again, I can go into getbootstrap.com's documentation, find a nav bar. That will get me there. Here's my go-to. Copy it. And I'm just going to paste it there at the top. Make sure my indents are nice and clean. And let's start changing stuff. That nav bar section should say orange juice. And it looks like orange. It's probably wrapped in a span. I'll address that image a little later. And the TM, the trademark. And then I know I want these links to pull to the right, so I'm going to find that UL and give it a class of MLAuto. Get rid of all these extra spans. Going to get rid of disabled. Going to get rid of active. So now we just have nav items, LIs, and nav link anchors. Home, about, case studies, blog, contact. Home. About. Case studies. Blog. And one more. Contact. Alright. Looks like all my text is uppercase here. So I'm just going to select my UL and give it a class of text, uppercase. Let's see where we are. Okay, not bad. Off to a decent enough start. Now it looks like there's, scratch that, it doesn't look like there's margin on either side. Let's go ahead and pull this color real fast. I'm going to use my color picker. Select the correct orange color. And let's give my nav a class of BG orange. It's going to be a custom class. And I'll give it navbar dark. Create that class, BG orange. Background color. Okay. There we go. Not bad, we're getting there. Let's add some serious padding. Do that up here. Let's do padding Y 5 and have a padding left 3. See what that looks like. That's too much. That's better. Up this to padding left 5. Push that orange juice in. Alright, not bad. Buy that for $1. Then we got the search bar. I don't think I even need Bootstrap here. Just going to create an input, type equals text. And that's it. I'll come back to the magnifying glass. So placeholder equals search. Okay. Now for this div with the ID of search bar, I'm going to give it a class of text right. And there we go. Search bar's in the right place. Let's give it a slight padding. Okay, not bad. How about I give that input? Just let's make it longer. Just experiment a little bit. Let's give it a class of W25. There we go. What that does is it gives it 25% of the width of its containing element. All right, I'm good with that. Moving forward, we got the main section. Let's take a look at the original again. I see a row. Okay, that's what I see when I look at this. A row with 2 column divs inside of it. So inside this container fluid, I'm going to create a div with a class of row. If I can remember how to type. And inside this row, I'm going to create 2 divs. And do they look evenly spaced? Not quite. Let's try 5 and 7. Let's try 5 columns and 7 columns. Okay, and inside the 5 column div, I'm just going to take a snapshot of that. No, I'm not. I'm going to just pull an orange from Google Images. There you go, I think that's the exact image. It's a JPEG. Now again, ideally, whenever you're pulling images off the web, you do want PNGs because those open the door for transparent backgrounds. But that's not what this session is about, so I won't get into it too much. Inside this 5 column div, I'll put my image of an orange. Way too big, so let's give my image a class of image fluid. Okay, not bad. And now in the 7 column div, what do we need? We need this, might be a paragraph, I'll make it a paragraph. This paragraph and these 2 buttons. And nothing is side by side except the buttons, so I don't need to make this a row or put a row in here or anything like that. Let's just create a paragraph element. I'll do the spans afterwards. Orange juice uses only the very best designed fruits to create your web and app designs. Okay. And below my P we have 2 buttons. Now I'm going to put those buttons in their own containing div. It's not strictly necessary, but I would recommend it anyway, especially if you're not confident yet about organizing the content of your web page. Button type equals button, and one is orange, one is light blue, so I'm going to give the first one a class of BTN and BG orange. Take advantage of that custom class that we created. Get a quote and view case studies. Get a quote. View case studies. And this one is going to be, I'll make it BTN info. I'll get us pretty close. It doesn't have to be perfect. btn info. Alright, now this will have a couple problems, but start with the buttons. Because we use that custom BG Orange class, it's not automatically making the text white or giving us a background color, so let's go ahead and add to this just a BTN primary class. Not exactly what we're going for, so let's take that out and instead add a text white class. There we go. Now we've got a white text and a right orange color. We would have to add that a similar corresponding hover effect on our own. I'm not going to worry about that right now, but easy enough to do. Okay, so they're all set. Now I want them both to be the same size, right? So let's go ahead and give each of these buttons also a class of, how about W50? And a margin X, no, padding X, no, margin X of 3. Let's see about that. Okay, that's kind of works, but it actually pushes them onto different lines. We don't want that. I'm going to get rid of this width 50, and this is something we're going to have to do in our own CSS. Just going to select all my buttons and give them a width of, let's go for 45%, 40%, 40%. Okay, not bad. I'm alright with that. What else do we have going on here? The text is much bigger. The buttons need a little more padding to the top and bottom, right? So let's give them a class of padding Y3. That might be a bit much. That's close. I'll take it. We also want them to make sure that they're centered. They look pretty centered, but just to be positive, they're actually not perfectly centered. Just to be positive, I'm going to take the div which contains the buttons and give them a class of text center. And while I'm at it, I'll give them a class of text uppercase. Oh wow. I'm actually shocked that that didn't work. Let's try it on the buttons themselves. There we go. Typo notwithstanding. Alright, and let's talk about that P. I'm not going to deal with the spans. You can deal with that on your own. Oh look, our menu has collapsed. I still think it's a little too soon, so let's go back and change this again to small. Okay, let's talk about that P. I made it a paragraph for convenience's sake, but obviously I want the text to be a lot bigger, I want it to be a different color, etc., etc. Well, Bootstrap also has a lot of typography classes. So let's say I wanted this to be a P element for organization's sake, but I wanted it to look like an H3. Not ideal, not what we want, but it's good to know that you can do that. I can give it a class of H1 and it will be a paragraph that has the same font stylings of an H1. It is a useful thing to know. What I'm going to do instead is something like display 4, which is a brand new class that just does some cool stuff with your fonts. It's way too big, obviously, but let's come back here and just change the font size a bit. See if that'll do it. It will not. Let's take a look at why it will not. Highlight my paragraph with the class of display 4, and that display 4 is actually giving it a font size of 3.5 rem. Well, while I'm in the Styles tab, why don't I dial this down a bit and see what I like. 2.5 is getting closer. How about 2.25? I'm going to go with 2 1/4. So what's happening here is the font size is coming from the class selector of display 4. So I'm going to be at least as specific. In this case, I'm actually being more specific because I'm doing p dot display 4. Okay, there we go. It's a nice size. I'm good with that. Can easily change the color. And let's give it some padding. Do that in here. In addition to the class of display 4, I'm going to give it a class of px4. Okay, not bad. We're getting there. We're getting a lot closer. Now, if I want it to be pushed down a little bit, there are some advanced things you could do with Flexbox to achieve exactly what you want there. I'm not going to get into them right now, though, for time's sake. Hey, Nick, hope you're feeling better. Instead, I'm going to take this paragraph and just give it a padding top of 5. That'll help push it down a little bit. And I'm actually okay with that. That looks good enough to me. So we got our spans, not going to deal with those. And the last thing is our footer. I'm going to use Bootstrap here and just give it a class of bg-info, since that's pretty close to the original blue. And I'm going to give it a height of 25. Now, this kind of Bootstrap class usually will not work. And the reason is because what this does is it gives it a height property of 25%. Heights in your CSS are really sensitive. In order to make it work, the parent element needs to have a given height. So let's go ahead and just select our body in my CSS and give it a height of 100 VH. And there we go, there's our footer. 100 VH, for those of you who don't know, VH stands for viewport height. So 100 VH is literally 100% of the height of your window. Okay, and yeah, I feel good about that. There are a lot of different ways you could get your footer stuck to the bottom. The best way actually has nothing to do with Bootstrap. I'm going to give my body the position relative attribute. And remember, in the last review session, I talked about the relationship between position relative and position absolute children. I'm going to give the footer position absolute, width 100%, bottom 0. And there you go. And it's stuck to the bottom. Okay, so don't stress that last point too much because it's not strictly necessary for you to know right now. I'm more concerned that you focus on the Bootstrap aspect of this. But there, in a matter of minutes, we built 90% of the Orange Juice project. The rest is going to be getting that magnifying glass in that search bar, cleaning up some of the styles that you want here, spacing out these images, getting that spacing out these links and getting that icon here at the top, the spans. But the layout is done. It's clean. Last thing we might want to do is make it behave responsively, right? So the biggest problem here, the nav bar is already responsive, fortunately, because it is a Bootstrap nav bar. But that middle section is not. So we're going to come back to those columns, and let's make them column 12, column medium 5, column 12, column medium 7. So now they stack vertically, but the footer is obviously in the wrong place. That's something else that we need to deal with in the case of responsiveness. Alright, so let's go ahead and get rid of this very bootleg fix for the footer. Okay, not bad. Let's give our main section a little bit of padding at the bottom. There we go. And And now we've got a nice responsive layout for mobile, right? Buttons are a little weird. That's something we could get in and fix. But up to here, everything looks pretty good. Maybe let's make the width of our search bar change responsively. So here we've got it at width 25. Let's change this instead to width 75, width medium 25. How about that? And let's say at a small screen size is all a little big. Let's do W small 50, and let's make that image smaller, a little bit smaller. Let's do 9 columns, MX Auto. There we go. It's better. Oh, the search bar didn't change width, but let's go ahead and get rid of this. I think the width class is not actually sensitive to the breakpoint, so that's something you might have to use a media query for. And that's what I mean when I say you can't just write off CSS entirely. But this gets us really nice, responsive website design with honestly very little HTML and almost no CSS entirely. If you tried to do this with vanilla CSS, we'd have quite a bit more. Okay, so that's orange juice. The rest, I think you guys can figure out on your own. Hopefully it was helpful as a demonstration of Bootstrap. I did want to go into Liquid Gem, but we're already at 350, so I'm actually going to jump straight into jQuery while we have the time. I'm going to clear out my file. And once again, if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out. It doesn't have to be now or during the session. I'm happy to answer them after the fact. I'm not going to be doing that right now. I'll try to do this on my own time and post a demo, but let's move forward to week 6. Okay, week 6. Where do you write your jQuery slash JavaScript code? Answer to that is you write it in your main.js file in your JS folder. So I'm going to go ahead and make one in my template right now. This is what our template looks like after Bootstrap. I'm going to right click on my project folder, select new folder, type in JS and hit enter. Now I have a JS folder. I'm going to right click on my JS folder, select new file, save this file as main.js. There we go, I have my JS file. What we need to do now is connect it to our HTML. So once again, the very bottom of our body tag, before a closing body tag, and at the very bottom of our scripts, I'm going to create a new script tag, type equals text/JavaScript, src source equals js/main.js. Remember, this is your relative file path. If your main.js file is located anywhere else, or if you want to pull from some other JavaScript file, this source is probably going to be different. So you have to understand how to independently write these file paths in order to target the right files and pull in the right code. Also, your main.js, that's your custom script, your custom JavaScript, and that always should be the last script to load. Should always be the last script to load. Okay. Now, because we're starting jQuery, I'm also going to grab the official jQuery CDN. Currently, I am set up with jQuery Slim, which came from Bootstrap, but I'm going to Google jQuery CDN, and I can click on that very first link, code.jquery.com, and here under jQuery Core, I'm just going to find the first one, jQuery Core 3.2.1 for me, and I'm going to click on uncompressed, just for the sake of demonstration, and it will give me the entire script tag right here, which I'm just going to copy, and I'm actually going to replace that first jQuery Slim script that came with Bootstrap 4. paste. All I need to do is clean it up a little so it looks, so, you know, the one thing here does not look like the other syndrome is over, and we're good to go. I now have a script to jQuery core, the full jQuery. It's just jQuery.js. I have my script to Popper. I have my script to Bootstrap, and I have my script to my main.js. All right. I'm now set up for jQuery. How do you link your personal JavaScript file to your HTML? Just discussed that. How would you explain what $document.ready means using plain English? Well, this gets down to jQuery syntax. jQuery syntax always starts with that $, followed by parentheses. And inside the parentheses is going to be your target or your selector. I prefer to use the word target because it's not always what we normally think of as a selector. $, parentheses, target. After those parentheses, you have some kind of action or event using a dot. And that action or event is almost always followed by another set of parentheses. This is jQuery syntax. Sometimes, if you're looking at other code out there, you might actually see it like this. Just so you are familiar with it, that you know that it's out there, some code will actually be written using the word jQuery rather than the $. It means the exact same thing. Don't get scared by it. It's nothing special. Okay, so $, document, .ready in plain English pretty much means when the document is ready, that's it, with that implied ellipsis included, okay? The reason why there's that implied ellipsis is because we expect to see something inside this ending set of parentheses, and what we want to see in here is do stuff. Okay, so in this code here, this is where we are going to include a function that will run when our document is ready. So when the document is ready, do stuff. When the document is ready, do stuff. We'll get more into that in a minute. What is jQuery? jQuery is a JavaScript library that essentially allows you to write more code with less. It allows you to write shorter, more condensed, often cleaner code that accomplishes the same amount as its plain vanilla JavaScript counterpart. So jQuery can be thought of as a shorthand for vanilla JavaScript. The reason why we teach you jQuery before JavaScript is really because the jQuery is much more approachable. It's just a little bit easier to jump into right off the bat. And the logic that jQuery requires is super clear and very essential to prepping you all for diving into true vanilla JavaScript, which can be considerably more complicated. So, where should you include jQuery in your index.html? It should be in your scripts section at the bottom of your body, and it should always come before your main.js script. And if you have a Bootstrap script, it should always come before your Bootstrap.js script. Should you always comment your jQuery? Absolutely. Abso-goddamn-lutely. You should always comment your jQuery. Okay, jQuery is so much easier and so much clearer and so much more approachable the more comments you write, the more what we call pseudocode that you write. Okay? Just like this. I mean, this is pseudocode. When the document is ready, do stuff. Perhaps a better example would be when I click this button, I want this image to hide. Okay, so that's pseudocode broken up into two pretty straightforward clauses. And now I know I can start with that very first clause. $target. Well, what's my target? It's the button. This is still pseudocode. This is not actually how you would write this. But what's the action? Click. Okay, let's say I have a button element that I'm actually just going to use button selector. Let's not complicate things. Okay, when I click this button, parentheses, and this is where we write the second clause. I want this image to hide. So image is my target in here, and the action is hide. Oh. Now what we're missing, which we haven't addressed yet, is the actual function expression. But that is really the only potentially complicated thing about jQuery syntax. It's this function syntax right here. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. $, parentheses with your target in the middle, and then dot action. In the parentheses following that first action is where you want to write what you want to happen. The syntax is unfamiliar. It's easy to make a typo and break all of your code, but it really is that simple, and all it takes is a little mileage and a little practice to really internalize how this is written. Okay? It is much easier than it looks. I will say what throws a lot of students off in the beginning is things aren't closed correctly. What I mean by that is we've got a whole mess of stuff happening right here. We've got this open parentheses that closes way the hell down here, this open curly brace that closes way the hell down here. It's really easy to forget one of them. Now, your text editor may do a good job of pointing it out to you, but sometimes it's not that obvious. A good trick to know is find your closing braces and your closing parentheses, your closing brackets, and click next to one of them. I don't know if you guys can, thanks Rich, I don't know if you guys can see in my screen, but my parentheses here is now underlined very slightly. Well, if let me see if I can zoom in and really show this. Okay, my parentheses is underlined, and if you look here, this parentheses, its opening counterpart, is also underlined. So it actually shows me, okay, that's its counterpart, that's the opening parentheses to its closing parentheses. Same deal with the curly brace. Closing curly brace is underlined, opening curly brace is underlined. So if I cannot find the counterpart to one of these elements, one of these characters, odds are I forgot it somewhere. So that can be a helpful way of diagnosing a problem like that. All right. Get rid of that, and we'll move on. Should you always come in your jQuery? What is the standard syntax for jQuery? I think we addressed that. What are the 4 different selector types? What are the 4 different selector types? Well, the first 3 are actually just our CSS selectors. So there's something like image or button, which are just element or type selectors, just as you would write them in CSS. Then there are class selectors, dot box or dot container, now that we've learned Bootstrap. Class selectors, and then there are, of course, ID selectors like hashtag intro, hashtag CTA. Okay, ID selectors. But there's also a 4th one, and this is the only one that's unique to JavaScript that you should be thinking about right now, and that is called the this selector. And the this selector is both amazing and nightmarish at the same time. Fortunately, at this stage for you guys, it should only be amazing. We'll address the this selector a little bit more further on, but for now, just know that it exists. Okay, we'll talk about what it means and what it specifically refers to in a bit. So those are our selectors, our 3 CSS selectors and this. What are 3 jQuery events? There are a bunch, but examples are ready. There's also .click, .doubleclick, my personal favorite, .hover, .load, .resize. Then there are other events which aren't actually events, but they kind of function the same way. .children, .parent, .sibling. There's a lot, but these are some examples. The most important ones for you guys right now are probably click and hover. There's also mouse leave and mouse enter. I'll give you some good examples of hover. Click is fairly obvious, and double click should also be fairly self-explanatory about what they refer to. What does animate do? Well, it animates stuff. That's pretty much it. We'll see an example of it, but I'm not going to talk much about the animate function because it is not in any way, shape, or form the best way to animate something, even if it's a very simple animation. I despise the jQuery animate function. Feel free to dig more into it, and maybe you'll prove me wrong about how terrible it is, but it animates stuff. That's all you need to know. What does append do? Append adds stuff. That's all it does. It adds stuff, usually elements, almost exclusively elements. We add elements to other elements. We will see examples of this. What does toggle class do? This is an interesting one. Toggle class turns classes on and off. So let's take a look at some examples. I'm going to create an H1, and in my CSS I'm going to style my H1 just a little bit. Give it a background color of tomato, text color of white. This is the hex code for white. If you don't know it, probably should by now. And then I'm going to create a new class. Let's just call it new class. New class that is going to have a background color of, let's do lime again, text color of dark blue, and let's go crazy. New class, first letter. Bet you didn't know that was a CSS selector. Font size 50 pixels. Okay, so we've created this new class with all these fun little styles, but nothing has it. Nothing in our CSS has the class of new class. All we've got is this one hello world H1, which is great. But oh my god, what am I demonstrating? Toggle class. Yeah, okay. Sorry folks, it's been a long day. I'm going to write my $sign in my JavaScript sheet. And what is my target here? What am I selecting? I'm selecting my H1. I only have one, so this works perfectly fine as my target or my selector. Let's start with pseudocode. I'm going to do something like when I click on my H1, I want to toggle new class. So the action here is going to be click. Inside of that click, we write function. And here's where we write the stuff that we want to do. What do I want to do? I want to toggle new class. Well, what's my target here? It's the same thing. It's still that H1. So let's just repeat it. And the action I'm going to use is going to be toggle class. And inside the parentheses following toggle class, I'm going to tell it which class to toggle. This is my argument that I'm telling it to toggle. And I'm going to tell it to toggle new class. So now when I click on my H1, I should toggle new class on H1. Remember, toggle class turns a class on or off. So in other words, when I click on my H1, it should turn new class as a class on my H1. Let's see it in action. I click on my H1 and it toggles the new class. That's not nearly as dramatic as I thought. Let's try that again. There we go. Nice and dramatic. Okay, I clicked on my H1 and let's examine it now. I'm gonna open my inspector, highlight it, and look at that. Let me make it bigger. My H1 in my Elements tab now has a class of new class. But again, let's look at my index. There's no class there. What's happened is that class has been dynamically added. It's been dynamically toggled on for this H1 from my JavaScript. And I can actually click it again, and now it's gone. No class. It's classless. Okay, and that's because every time I click, it's going to toggle this class on or off. If it's on, it's going to toggle it off. If it's off, it's going to toggle it on. And I can do this forever. Okay, that's toggle class. Now something I really want to drive home about toggle class that a lot of students, they never really engage with it because they don't often have to. But then when they do have to, they don't know how to handle it properly. Let's say my class, my H1 already has a class of italic. Okay, and this class of italic has, crap, is it text transform? It is not text transform. Text decoration. Let's try text decoration. Nope. This is one of those things I always forget. Oh, seriously, man. Font style. There we go. All right, font style italic with the class italic. Well, it has the class italic, and now if I click on it, it is both italic and has the new class. It has two classes now, italic, new class. Okay? What if I don't want new class to be italic? Well, I can certainly come in here and say new class, font style, none or initial. I can do that, but that's kind of more trouble than it's worth right now. I want to do this strictly from JavaScript. Well, something that I could do is inside the same function, as I'm turning new class on, I can also turn italic off. Let's try it. Italic, not italic. Look at the classes down here. We've got new class, italic. New class, italic. Okay, that totally works. I see this a lot with students. What they don't know is that there's a cleaner way to write this, and that is to simply toggle them both in the exact same line of code. That's the way toggle class works. It does the exact same thing. It turns italic off and new class on, turns new class off and italic on. So you can combine classes which you are toggling on and off, even if they're not on at the same time or not off at the same time inside this function like that. That's toggle class. This is also a perfect example of why you might use the this selector. But again, I'll get into this a little more closely later on. Actually, no, let's just do it now. Let's say I have multiple H1s on my page. Okay, and they're all the same. I'm going to click on one. Should not have done that yet. Let me put this back to, they're both using the H1 selector. Now when I click on one, they all toggle. They all have their class toggle. Because what are these selectors? They're element or type selectors. And remember, H1 as a selector selects any and all H1s in your HTML. So really, this doesn't work. This is why you might want to use the this selector, which will specify, identify and specify not only H1s, but specifically the H1 on which you click. Okay? This is a variable that is highly subject to context, so it can do some unexpected things, but this is a really clean, clear example of how and why you would want to use this and what it does in contrast to just an H1 selector. Okay. All right, moving on. What is a jQuery plugin? A jQuery plugin is really just another tool you can add to the library. Like there are plugins for special kinds of carousels or special kinds of scrolling animations, or just these one-off effects or tools that might be really useful for designing your site. They just add another tool to the toolbox or another color to the box of crayons, so to speak. Exercises. In HTML, add an image and 2 buttons. And in jQuery, make the image element appear and disappear when you click the corresponding button. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of my code. And I'm just going to create an image. Okay. Alt equals equal. And below my image, I'm going to create 2 buttons. I'm going to give them IDs. I'm going to give the first one the ID of hide button. And its text is going to say hide. I'm going to create an identical button with an ID of show button. And its text is going to say show. Let's see what we got. Okay. We've got an image and a hide and a show button. What I want to happen is when I click on the hide button, the image disappears. When I click on the show button, it comes back. So let's write that in my pseudocode. When I click hide button, I want the image to hide. And this is what I mean when I say commenting your code. When I click show button, I want the image to reappear or to show. This gives you a roadmap to work from. So first, $, what's my target? It's hide button. Well, it has an ID, so I'm literally going to target it with the hide button ID. And what's the action? Click. Function, do stuff. What do I want to do? I want the image to hide. So what's my target? It's going to be the image. And what's my action? Hide. Let's test it. Here we go. The image disappears. Exactly what we want. It does not, however, obviously, come back yet. So now let's do that function. When I click show button, so my target is going to be show button, function, do stuff. Stuff that I want to do is I want the image to, what's the opposite of hide? It's show. Let's test it. Click hide, image hides, click show, image shows. Now, it's great if you get here on your own. It really is. What I want you to do, though, is let's go one step further. Let's figure out exactly what is happening under the hood. I'm going to open my inspector, and I'm going to select my image element. So I can see it down here. I hope all of you can as well. And it's really important that you understand what is happening behind the scenes. It's not really critical right now, but it will be critical for you guys very soon. So I encourage you to practice this whenever you run across a new function or a new anything. Find out how it works and why. So in this case, when I click on hide, watch the image element down here. What happened? What happened is it got this style attribute with the value of display none. Do you guys remember what display none does as a CSS property? It hides an element. It doesn't just hide it though, it makes it as though the element never existed, never rendered, never loaded. Okay? That's what .hide as a function does. It gives an element the display none property. Display property with the value of none. Display none. That's why we see the buttons like jump to the top left of the screen when the image hides. And when I click show, it takes it away. Display none. Okay? That is very important for you to know, because sometimes you might want to hide an element without actually making it as though it never rendered. Like, what if I don't want the buttons to move? I could position them absolutely or something like that, but that's kind of an inelegant solution. So what I can do instead is when I click the hide button, I want to use the .css function, and I'm going to do, let's do opacity 0. I don't know if you guys know what opacity is, but opacity refers to how opaque, or alternatively how transparent something is. So with an opacity of 0, something will be completely transparent, completely see-through. An opacity of 1, something will be completely opaque or completely not see-through. So let's see if this works. And look at that. Our buttons stay where they are because that image element is actually still there. It is only transparent. So this might be an additional level of precision you might want to exercise in your functions or your manipulations. And it is important to understand the difference between display none and opacity 0. Or you could also do, what was it, visibility hidden. But what if I don't know what the right property, the right value of visibility is for not hidden? Well, then I could use the initial value, which, if you don't know, initial is just like a reset button on any CSS property. It's a good thing to know. Let's try it this way. There you go. Same exact effect. Okay, now once more, I prefer opacity because opacity allows for gradation. I can do opacity 0.5 and it's going to be semi-transparent. Maybe you don't want that, but even if you don't, something that opacity allows for is, I'm going to add a transition property to my image. It's a little fast, maybe you guys can't see. Let's do 7.5. What opacity allows for is that kind of fade out effect. And it allows for that because you can actually have an opacity between 0 and 1. Visibility, it's either hidden or it's not. So it just jumps from one to the other. Opacity allows you to do stuff like this. It's fun. Okay, anyway, the point here is understand what the hide function and the show function are doing. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create a third button, which instead of hiding or showing actually uses a function called toggle. I'm going to call this button with an ID of toggle button. And its text is going to say toggle. I'm going to write third function. It's going to look exactly the same. Change my target. And I'm going to change my function from show or hide to just toggle. Let's reload. And if I click on the toggle button, it does the exact same thing. Style, display none. Let's click on the toggle button again. It shows back up. Okay, so toggle is a useful function that actually combines the hide and show function. It turns display none on or off, just like toggle class. It's good to know. Sometimes you only want one, but toggle is a good way of combining the two. And if let's say I want the image to actually start from hidden, select my image and give it the display none property. Okay, my image is hidden. Will it work if I click show? Yes, it will. It's actually kind of weird that it shifts my buttons down because it gives it display block. That's interesting. I learned something new. Will toggle work? Yes, does the same thing. That's interesting. So actually, show and toggle, if your element is starting from display none, it will default to applying display block to your element. That is actually really important to know because images are not by default block elements. Okay. Anyway, not to get sucked down that rabbit hole. Create a div element and give it a class. Add an h1 element inside the div. I'm going to start moving a little bit faster. Div class equals my div. Add an h1 element inside the div. I'm going to get rid of this image and its buttons so we are working a little cleaner. Get rid of this. And we'll get rid of everything but the h1 style. No, I'm going to keep new class. Okay. So all we have now is our h1. Make the appearance of the h1 switch between two styles when it is double clicked. All right. So when I double click my h1, I want it to change styles. So my target, I could do h1. But because it's inside a div with a class, I might as well use it. So I'm going to do that, just like a CSS selector. My div space h1. All h1s inside of the element with the class of my div. That's my target. And what's my action? Double click, function, do stuff. What do I want to happen? I want, let's use this selector here, this. Dot, I want it to change styles. Well, I have to think about how I want to do this. Now I have this class, new class, which I can just apply to it. I can use the toggle class method, right? Let's see if that works. Double click, and it works. Okay. Something you might want to keep in mind here is your new class, if it's being overridden in your CSS for whatever reason, like let's say I selected my h1 that way. I think that, yeah. So that's actually overriding some of my new class styles. It's only doing this one. And that's because this selector is more specific than this. So that's something that is good to be wary of when using toggle class. It can easily happen. And again, the way to fix it or check and see what's going on is to jump into your styles tab and figure out what's being overridden and where it's coming from. Okay, so let's just change that back. This way, double click is working, all is well, but let's do this instead with the CSS function. Rather than new class, let's change multiple CSS properties at the same time. Syntax for this can get a little complicated, but it's a really easy thing to look up whenever you need to use it, so don't worry about that. Font style. Okay, that'll do it. So I'm changing the text color and the font style. Let's change this to background color. So reload. Now when I double click, it changes its styles. And how does it do this? Let's look at our elements in the inspector. It actually adds a style attribute to my H1 with the value of background color lime, font style italic. Okay, so it doesn't affect our CSS. It doesn't actually change our CSS. We just use this .css function to inject a style attribute with these values into our HTML, and it overrides our CSS. So that's a good thing to know. And it's not turning off because .css does not function the same way as toggle. It applies these styles, and that's it. Okay. How about we try this with hover? See what happens. Now when I hover over my H1, it should change styles. It does. Once again though, it does not change back. That is a good thing to understand about using jQuery's hover function. The way to make it change back is what's called a callback function. So after this function closes, after the close and curly brace, I'm going to write comma, function, and I'm just going to pretty much write the exact same thing, except I'm going to change these values back to where I want them. Tomato and initial. So this function is going to run when I hover, and this function is going to run when I hover off. It's called a callback function. It's a good thing to know. You're not going to need to use it very often, but if you use the .hover function in jQuery and it's not behaving the way you expect, it's probably because you're missing a callback function. It took me forever to figure that out on my own. It's a major pain, but it's a good thing to know, and you guys have me, so there. Create a UL element with two LI elements inside and a button to add elements. So in my HTML, I'm going to create a UL two LI elements inside, and below my UL I'm going to add a button and with an ID of append button. Okay, looks good. See what it looks like. Okay, there are our LIs, and this is our append and LI button. In my JavaScript, I'm going to write some pseudocode. When I click append button, I want to add an LI with some text to the UL. That's where things start getting a little more complicated. Well, first, the outer function. What's my target? Append button. What's the action? Click. Function. Sorry, there's some clown using his phone right outside my door. I hope it's not too distracting for you guys. Append button. When I click on append button, do stuff. What's the stuff that I want to do? I want to add an LI with some text to the UL. So what's my target? Is it an LI? Is it the UL? Is it the button? I want to add it to the UL. So the UL is actually going to be my target. UL dot append, and what we're actually going to write here is the HTML for an LI with some text. Let's test it out. And there you go. Okay, that's the power of append, but let me show you something just a little bit more interesting. Don't worry too much about it yet if you're not in JavaScript. But what I'm doing is just creating a counter variable, the value of 0. And inside the append argument, I'm going to fold that variable in with the actual HTML of an LI. But before I do that, before I actually append it, actually no, after I append it, I'm going to add one to counter. So what should happen is every time I click the button, it should add an LI with a new number. Let's test it out. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There you go. Let's try it real fast with an array. Let's make counter an array of names. One, two, three, 4 names. So now instead of counter, I'm gonna, yeah, I didn't do this right. Don't worry about the extra code here. I just want to show you guys exactly what you can do with some of these functions. There we go. Yep. So now I click append and I get Evan. Click append and I get Matt. Click append, I get April. Click append, I get Nick. Not gonna click append again. But this is some of the stuff that you can do with a jQuery function like this and with a JavaScript variable, which we'll learn about in my next review session or in the natural course of your class if you're approaching JavaScript. Okay, you can actually put a dynamic value or dynamic variable inside an argument like this and have it change depending on how many times you already clicked the button or based on a user's input somewhere else on the page. Just good to know. Create a div element, change the appearance of a div when you hover over it. We already did that. Add some text to an H2. Make the H2 element slide up when your mouse leaves the element. I'm not actually going to do that because that requires the animate function. Yeah, I think that about covers it. There are quite a bit of other possibilities for using jQuery, and we can explore some more complex examples, but let's see, what can we do? What can we do? I feel like I had some ideas for this and I've lost them all. Well, let's animate some stuff, but not using the animate function. Okay, how about that? Okay, reload. I'm going to get rid of my UL and my button. Okay, sounds good. I'm going to select my div, which is the div which contains this H1. And I'm going to give it a height of 0. And before I do anything, I'm going to give everything on my site a transition property. If you're not familiar with a transition property, that's too bad. Use it anyway. This is not an animation course. I will talk about it at another time. Okay, so reload. Alright, let's not do this with my div. Let's give my H1 a height of 0. Okay, so now our H1 is, well, it's not there. It is, but the element itself has a height of 0, so that we're not seeing the background color. Alright, so let's go ahead and animate it. Let's add a button down here. And what do I want to happen? When I click the button, I want the H1 background color to drop down. So, what's my target? It's going to be the button. Action is going to be click. Function. Do stuff. What do I want to do? I want the background color of the H1 to drop down. Well, to do that, we're going to have to select my div H1. We're going to use the CSS property to change its height. Let's do something a little extreme, like 400 pixels. Save, reload. All we've got is our button. There you go. Animated it. It's kind of a lot. Okay, not bad. Now the reason this is working is because our text is actually white, so you can't see it before it has dropped down. But let's try this another way. Yeah, I have an idea. Below the H1, I'm going to add a paragraph with some dummy text. I'm going to add a couple of them. 3 of them. And my paragraphs are all going to have an opacity of 0. But I am going to make their text white anyway. Okay, so nothing changes yet. Yeah, let's do it this way. So now they should all have a tomato background color. They should all have a height of 0, color of white. But my paragraphs have 0 opacity. So now when I click on the button, not only is the H1 going to change height, we're also going to select my div p .css and change its opacity to 1. Kind of overly dramatic. Let's change this to 50 pixels. A little accordion effect. Okay, start of something kind of fun. Now, something that you'll learn about soon enough is the set timeout function, which actually allows you to delay the running of a function. You don't need to know about it yet, and that's okay, but I'm just going to demonstrate, do a quick little demo of the easy way to make this a little cooler. There you go, something like that. Okay, so you can have fun with this. jQuery is actually a really effective, really efficient, really easy syntactically way to create nice and clean animations like this for your own custom menus. Maybe you want a menu to pop out from the left, stuff like that. How would I do that? Create a div with an ID of sidebar. And this will be the last demonstration for the night. Sidebar, height 100 VH, background color. Let's just do dark blue. And Again, I'm using a lot of things which you probably shouldn't know, shouldn't have been exposed to, and shouldn't recognize. If you feel the need to research them and learn them on your own, I fully support that. Let's have yeah, forget it. I'll have it happen with the exact same button. My sidebar is going to be position, absolute, right, 0, top 0, transform origin, right center. Yeah. So when the button gets clicked, what we're also going to do is have sidebar dot CSS transform scale x 1. Okay, and let's just put some stuff inside sidebar. There we go. Definitely needs to come out more. Okay, we got a sidebar that just popped out. And we got a kind of a, UI kind of effect going on here, the way that the screen is broken up. Now again, this is a really cursory example, and ideally you would have some way of making these fade back, which currently we do not. But this is a pretty straightforward example of using the .css method in conjunction with transition to create some really cool effects. Using the hover effect is just as valid. The hover function is just as valid for things like this, and something I do quite often. Only thing I would warn you about in using the hover effect is you can't hover on a touch device. So bear that in mind. You can't create a hover effect for mobile phone or tablet. You have to have some kind of alternative, especially for accessibility purposes. Alright, I feel like I'm going a little off the rails here, and it's almost 5 o'clock, so I'm going to shut it down. If anyone has any questions, anything you want to talk to me about or ask me about, anything else you want me to go over in greater detail, feel free to let me know. In the meantime, everybody have a good evening, and I'll see you next time.